In the summer of 1940, Britain's survival depended on a technological system the German Luftwaffe attacked, but never fully understood. Along the English coastline stood a chain of tall steel towers known as chain home. This network formed the world's first operational early warning system integrated into a national air defense structure. Though still relatively new and unproven under large-scale combat conditions, it was already central to Britain's ability to resist air attack. Chain home stations could detect incoming aircraft at distances exceeding 100 miles. That early warning gave RAF Fighter Command the time it needed to scramble fighters, concentrate limited resources, and position squadrons for interception. Without radar, British fighters would have been forced to fly continuous patrols. Pilots and fuel would have been exhausted. German bombers would have approached largely unseen. By July 1940, the system was no longer experimental in concept. It was operational in practice. It functioned as the eyes of Britain's air defense. German intelligence was aware of its existence. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights conducted before the war had photographed the distinctive radar towers. Signals intelligence had detected their transmissions. The presence of radar along Britain's coast was not hidden. What remained uncertain to German planners was how effectively this technology had been integrated into British defensive operations. Luftwaffe intelligence assessments identified radar stations as important installations, but not decisive ones. In operational planning documents, radar sites appeared alongside airfields, aircraft factories, ports, and other infrastructure targets. Radar was recognized as useful. It was not understood as central. When the Luftwaffe intensified its campaign against southern England in August 1940, radar stations appeared on target lists. On August 12th, coordinated attacks struck several chain home sites along the coast. The station at Ventnor, on the Isle of Wight, was heavily damaged. Poling, Rye, and Dover were also attacked. German pilots reported direct hits. Aerial reconnaissance photographs showed collapsed structures, burning buildings, and visibly damaged equipment. By conventional standards, the attacks were tactically successful. Bombs struck their intended targets. Destruction was clearly observable. Operational reports reflected this apparent success. Several damaged stations temporarily went off the air. For hours, parts of the radar chain were blind. Bomber formations approaching through those sectors encountered reduced warning times. RAF responses became less coordinated. From the perspective of Luftwaffe aircrews and planners, the missions had achieved their immediate objectives. Radar sites had been hit. Disruption had followed. Intelligence summaries recorded the damage. They noted the temporary loss of coverage. Yet the disruption did not last. Within days, most stations were transmitting again. Ventnor, the most severely damaged site, remained offline longer than others. Even there, a mobile reserve station was deployed within hours. Despite the visible destruction, partial early warning coverage was restored. Elsewhere, repairs were completed with surprising speed. Towers remained standing. Equipment was replaced. Operations resumed. The Luftwaffe continued its wider campaign. Focus shifted toward airfields and fighter engagements. Radar stations were attacked again on August 15th and 18th. These strikes were limited and inconsistent. They were not sustained. They were not elevated above other target categories. The outcome presented a contradiction. Radar stations had been bombed. Damage had been documented. Disruption had occurred. Yet the early warning system continued to function. German reports acknowledged this inconsistency. It did not lead to a reassessment of priorities or doctrine. The physical destruction of radar sites had not produced the strategic result expected. The stations had been damaged. Britain's radar-based warning system had not been neutralized. German intelligence faced a problem of interpretation. Luftwaffe reconnaissance could photograph damaged towers and burning buildings. It could not measure the operational resilience of a distributed system. Reports from the August raids documented physical destruction. RAF interception rates, however, remained high. The disconnect was evident in intelligence assessments. The underlying cause was misunderstood. Luftwaffe analysts interpreted radar as a technological asset. They did not see it as a component within an integrated defense network. The towers themselves became the focus. Their visible vulnerability suggested that sustained attacks would eliminate the threat. What German planners failed to recognize was that radar stations were nodes. They were part of a system designed with redundancy and rapid repair capability. British air defense doctrine had anticipated attacks on radar installations. Each chain home station was supported by reserve equipment, mobile transmitters, and trained repair crews. Damage to antennas and surface structures often appeared dramatic. Underground cables and receiver equipment frequently remained intact. Stations could resume limited operations within hours using backup systems. The chain home network overlapped in coverage. The loss of a single station did not create an exploitable gap. German intelligence noted the speed of repairs. This was interpreted as evidence that the damage had been superficial. It was not recognized as proof of deliberate defensive planning. The conclusion drawn was that radar stations were not as critical as initially assessed. The possibility that they were more resilient than expected was not fully considered. Luftwaffe bombing doctrine further complicated the targeting calculus. German operational planning in 1940 prioritized destruction of enemy air forces. This was achieved through direct engagement and attacks on airfields. The doctrine had been developed during campaigns in Poland and France. It emphasized eliminating opposing fighters and disrupting their operating bases. Radar stations fit awkwardly into this framework. They were not aircraft. They were not airfields. They provided information. German planners had no equivalent system to judge their operational value. The Luftwaffe's own approach to air defense relied on ground observers and limited early warning networks. A centralized radar-directed interception system lay outside their doctrinal experience. Operational feedback reinforced the misinterpretation. After the initial August raids, RAF Fighter Command continued to intercept German formations with regularity. From the Luftwaffe's perspective, this suggested two possibilities. Either the radar system had not been significantly impaired, or British fighters were relying on other methods of detection. Both conclusions pointed away from sustained radar targeting. If the system was already repaired, further attacks seemed redundant. If the British were operating effectively without it, radar was not decisive. The logic was internally consistent. It was based on an incomplete understanding of how Fighter Command functioned. By late August, Luftwaffe operational priorities shifted. Airfields in southern England became the primary focus. Particular emphasis was placed on sector stations that housed fighter squadrons and controlled operations. These attacks placed severe strain on Fighter Command. Infrastructure was damaged. Pilots were exhausted. The decision was tactically rational within German doctrine. It reflected an implicit conclusion. Radar suppression was not essential to achieving air superiority. The pattern of targeting revealed a strategic choice. This choice was documented in operational orders and sortie records. Radar stations were not ignored entirely. They were no longer treated as a critical target set requiring sustained attention. The absence of a dedicated radar suppression campaign was not an oversight. It was the result of assessments. Those assessments concluded such a campaign was unnecessary or impractical. British repairs appeared rapid. RAF interceptions remained effective. The fundamental misunderstanding was not about radar technology itself. It was about what radar enabled. Chain home stations were visible and targetable. They formed only the outermost layer of Britain's air defense system. Behind the towers lay filter rooms, operations centers, and communication lines. These processed raw radar data into actionable intelligence. Fighter Command headquarters at Bentley Priory received reports. These came from radar stations, observer corps posts, and filtering centers. Information flowed upward, orders flowed downward. Sector controllers scrambled and vectored individual squadrons. The system was hierarchical. It was distributed. Destroying radar stations removed one source of information. It did not disable the command structure. German intelligence documented the existence of Fighter Command operations rooms. Their significance was not fully appreciated. Luftwaffe planners understood that British fighters were directed from the ground. They did not grasp the depth of integration between detection, filtering, and control. Without a comparable system to reference, operational dependency was difficult to assess. Radar stations were treated as isolated assets. They were not recognized as the front end of a decision-making network. Even sustained attacks on radar installations would not have blinded Fighter Command entirely. Reaction times would have been reduced. Organizational structure would have remained intact. Observer core posts and visual tracking would have provided fallback coverage. This coverage was less precise. It was not absent. In early September, German targeting priorities shifted again. On September 7th, the Luftwaffe launched large-scale attacks on London. The campaign moved from airfields to urban bombardment. The decision was influenced by multiple factors. These included retaliation for RAF raids on German cities. There was also a belief that attacking London would force Fighter Command to commit its remaining reserves. Radar stations no longer featured prominently in operational planning. The window for sustained radar suppression had closed, not because such a campaign had been attempted and failed, because it had never been pursued with the intensity required to test British resilience. The consequences became evident in the weeks that followed. RAF Fighter Command continued to detect incoming raids. It coordinated interceptions. It inflicted unsustainable losses on German bomber formations. The Luftwaffe never achieved the air superiority required for Operation Sea Lion. The planned invasion of Britain was never launched. Many factors shaped the outcome of the Battle of Britain. Among them was a technology that remained operational. It did so because its true role was never fully understood by those who might have destroyed it. The failure to destroy British radar was not a result of incompetence. It was not a failure of execution. German attacks on radar stations in August 1940 were tactically competent. They achieved visible damage. The failure was conceptual. Radar was the linchpin of an integrated system. That system required sustained effort to suppress. The towers were struck. The system behind them was never targeted in a way that reflected its importance. By the time German planners fully understood what radar enabled, the strategic opportunity had passed. If you like exploring history beyond the textbook, subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more ahead.